with activities that we hope will help expand your understanding of systems thinking, mental models. We're going to give a little bit of time to you to discuss your visual models. And then also you are going to be sharing your information, your learnings, the things that you took away from your supplemental text. So all of those are on deck today. But first, as always, we obviously want to welcome everyone back to class, but this is part of the Cadre tradition to welcome and to share. So for the good of the whole group, anyone have some good news to share?
Yeah, I bought a new boat.
Oh, yes.
I want the world to know.
Over spring break, we took a trip to California and got engaged.
Oh,
Yay.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, lovely. When's the wedding?
Great question, Trudy.
Did he spring it on you? And
it was a surprise. It was a morning walk on the beach. I had no idea it was coming. So
oh, how romantic.
It is nice. Someone else have some good news?
I can share, if anyone's wondering, I'm still pregnant. I have 3 weeks to go, and I just had an ultrasound this week, and they said the baby is already 8 pounds 9 ounces.
All
so
right.
I don't quite make it 3 more weeks, but the next Cadre class, I should have a baby to show.
Oh.
Is it a boy or a girl?
It's a boy.
Oh.
Has Scott Frost got a hold of you yet?
Right, alignment.
Oh, congratulations, Brittany.
That's exciting.
We love babies. We love to share them. We love to show them off for everyone to enjoy. If that's okay. I mean, we'll share the pictures if we get them. So babies are always, yeah. Anyone else? Anything not so good happening in your world that you'd like to share? Okay. Well, we would like to have this time for then, as we normally do in a breakout room. We're going to send you off to share with your Cadre members and responding to these statements. I have practiced being a servant leader this past month by. So what are some things that you've been able to really grasp onto and understand and reflect that the servant leadership that you are involved in, that you are representing, that you are this was what was happening. And then also my experience in systems or organizations have led me to think. Okay, so for those two, any questions? All right, so how have you been a servant leader this past month? And what experiences have you had in systems or organizations that have maybe added to your thinking or have taken you in a direction or supported what you've already learned. So have those conversations, okay? And we are going to see what we can come up with here. Oh, let's. Here we go. All right. You'll have 15 minutes. Sorry, I was on mute. Miranda, what would you like to share on either of these two? Either you're being a servant leader or what has been your experience in systems?
I can share about my systems a little bit. So we have been focused on FCCLA for me a lot because we just had our state leadership conference and we had a really quick turnaround for nationals. So just seeing how the system is changing with being virtual has been really interesting. And then how within my chapter kind of dynamics are changing. So we have seniors that are graduating. We're getting ready to input new chapter officers and just watching the system change and how that works. And then Yulia had a really good example of using her book. And so that was pretty cool of how she was able to use one of her supplemental texts within her system of teaching. So that was really neat to share as well.
Yeah, cool. All right, Scott, what would you want to share?
My experience with systems over the last month has been a roller coaster ride somewhat, because we have two agencies in one facility that is working together to try to create a better system. Me on the educational end, and they're on the behavior end. And I realized that while they all affect each other, my facility, my school is the most effective when decisions are made. So we've had to stop, reset, and keep going because of the way, without going into a whole lot of detail, because of the way their ideas are to help with the behavior, because we're safety first, so it affects the school. One thing that we have done, my assignment, like I told Trudy, is done already, because we've already worked on the silos and figured out how it would fit into the system and through unit-based management. But yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Dirk, what about you?
Our group talked about, with it being the time of year that it is, with transitioning and testing, people being hired, people leaving, that this is just a time where taking action and helping out with like the little things, if it is with the transitioning coming into school, with a positive attitude and saying good morning to everybody, because this is a time of year everybody's tired and not in the best mood. I had told my group, like, I'll make it to my room and I'll say good morning to everybody. And then when I shut my door, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be here right now. But just being able to, you know, help with the little things. I think when you help with the little things, even if it's not in your role, like Brooke talked about, just like she did, you know, chalk the walk and recognizing people that maybe don't always get recognized. So just uplifting people right now. And as far as systems go, I think, you know, when I think about our Zoom discussions, we talked about just how complex they are and how different they can be for everybody and everyone's experience with them too.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I heard quite a bit of you know, echoing of the comments from your group regarding being a servant leader. Primarily, it's just comes down to being there, being the listener, being the person who uplifts, as you said, the person who is going to try their best to support others, while hopefully also taking care, you know, doing some self-care. That you cannot be a servant leader if you come to that just being exhausted or being depleted yourself. So hopefully all of you are finding ways to do some self-care as you are being the servant leader for your team, for your district in some circumstances. But obviously, you as a servant leader, being that empathetic person, yeah, it's important, but you know, self-care as well. Tarek, you came off of mute. Did you want something? Did you want to say something, add
Yeah.
something?
Okay, I will say something. Thank you. So with G3 or Group 3 with Lisa, Cedric, and Muhammad, we were 50-50 on agreeing something, or we didn't disagree, but the ideas were honestly were different. So Alisa and Cedric come with that leadership that we should work and trying that is the responsible of everything is by the leader. So reacting reacting is giving away our power. We should not react, and both Cedric and Alisa said that respond it's staying you and control yourself and how you can stay with the other on the line. While Muhammad and I, we talked about how to be present or how to listen actively to the others. And with every single moment about servant leadership, it just come to my mind Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, and Gandhi, and so on. So I believe this is good. Those are good leaders to take some examples from them. Then the we talk about system as well, and Cedric come with the good examples about the new school and the purpose and uh, about that high school and how they get a good feedback. So then we just add that being new in a system is not easy, but repairing the system probably is a much easier. Thank you.
Sure. Mandy, what would you like to share here?
Well, in our group, I think the example of Yulia's approach and working with students around a fierce conversation was one that stood out for me. She used some humor to approach students, but also learned some things from that book that helped her have a conversation with students in a different way. And one of those was to ask questions about how they're feeling rather than sharing immediately how she was feeling. So that one I think is one that I've thought about. And then we talked about systems as well. And one of the questions I raised was, is it a measure of success in a system for the system to continue when the leader leaves? Or should that be an aspirational goal, or is it a realistic goal? So
Nice.
Can you
Does
say
anybody
that
have any
again?
thoughts on that?
I feel like I need to hear that one more time.
Okay.
so if you have a system and a leader in that system departs, like they're not, the example was a building as a system, and the building principal leaves, then should the systems that you've created under that person's leadership be able to continue once that leader has moved on? Is that part of the aspiration of the system, that you create enough guardrails that any one individual coming or going wouldn't create disruption in the system and it could just continue seamlessly? That's the goal. I'm curious about if it's a realistic or if it's aspirational or somewhere in the middle.
Thoughts on that? Good question.
Yeah, that actually makes me think about some folks that have replaced or followed really strong principles at buildings, and things are good for a couple years, but then their leadership either strengthens that place or that organization, or their leadership style begins to then the adjustments are there because of that leader's way that they run and organize their building. I've seen that a few times, and at least in Lincoln Public Schools. It also makes me think about my time as a classroom teacher. Like, my goal was always that my classroom would run a certain way, whether I was there or not. So a sub could come and it would run the way it would because I had created it to be that way. But a classroom is so different than a building or an organization, because it's so much more. There's just there's fewer parts with a classroom than with the bigger we get, the harder it is, right? So I feel like this could be a whole class session, your question. So thank you. That's an awesome question.
Yeah.
Mandy, there's a book that just came out from ASCD that was high performing, high poverty schools. And that is a significant topic in the book, as they look at what the impact of leadership has on a district or a building. And looking at that very question is kind of the premise of the entire book. So I would suggest that one if you're looking to look more into that.
Ernie, could you type the name in the chat, please?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, I would like to add that I think it is connected with the culture overall. Like Kim, you were talking about that the classroom will run, but that's because you established the culture like this. But if I come and I will teach your subject, it will be very, very different, because my culture is different than your culture in some areas. So I think if the leadership changes, so it will be some changes.
I would like to add a little what I learned from the book that I was reading. I learned that if knowledge is shared from the bottom all the way to the top, or from the top all the way to the bottom, even if someone leaves along the way, just because everybody has been trained to do certain things in an organization, the organization will continue without suffering. But when we limit most of the training on the top, then it becomes a challenge when the top leads.
Okay.
One thing too, when leadership changes, and I think Kim mentioned, you know, it goes smooth for a few years and then might fall off. Some of that may be perception too. So when a leader leaves and they have people they've hired, people they've trained, people that are loyal to them, that new person may not seem like they're doing as good of a job running the organization or keeping the structure in place, when that might not be their goal, and you might not like the change because you're loyal to, you know, XYZ former leader. So sometimes the perception of what's going on is different than what is actually going on too. I've seen when replacing leaders. So.
And to go back kind of what Shilly had mentioned, I think like for a system to run seamlessly, I think we would like to say like everybody's replaceable and you could replace one person with another person very easily. But at the same time, I think it really goes to a whole nother system of like training those new people when they come in. Because if those new people aren't trained correctly for that job they're going to perform in, then that's when you're going to have a break in your system, because they'll be running something or doing something and not maybe know the culture or the system or how it's supposed to be done properly. So I think it's both the people and the system in place, but also making sure you've got some really strong training for when you bring those new people in, to making sure that they're doing their job with fidelity and they're doing it correctly in order to keep that system going.
I also think back to like, what are the core values and the mission and the vision of the system?
Mhm.
And, you know, when Jeff was talking, it reminded me of like when the Huskers have a new football coach, they're inheriting the football team, the players, the coaches, and the fans. And so, you know, the new coach, the new leader may have a different vision or different core values. And so I think you have to be able to identify what are the core values within the system and what are those core values that are unwavering, that will carry it through regardless of who the leader is.
I think too, a system has to always be evaluated against all the other variables, like the times changing, maybe the clientele changing. There are other variables at play. And so I think it's not necessarily like new leaders that come in and inherently systems fall apart. I actually think it's maybe more problematic when we try too hard to preserve a system that's outdated. I don't know, the book that I read for my choice, it presented a strong case about education as a system being pretty outdated, and there are lots of opportunities for innovation, but we just keep, you know, doing things because that's how they've always been done. And I think, you know, having new leaders come in and evaluate systems up against some of those other variables and really try to imagine new possibilities and solve problems that the system is perpetuating. I think it's a good opportunity, and sometimes having fresh leadership and fresh eyes come in to evaluate those systems, I don't know, I think that might be good.
Mm-hmm.
Alyssa, what you shared makes me think so much about thinking about servant leadership, not as like picking up trash outside the building, but like your strong emotional intelligence, because with all of that, knowing how some people respond to change, we have to be ready to have conversations when people might be emotional and in whatever way that they might demonstrate those emotions. And we have to be ready to have lots of conversations about how people are feeling and how we can move forward, even if we feel some type of way about XYZ.
When I'm looking back on Manny's question, I think there's a couple different type of leaders you can have come into your system and be very successful. You can have one that comes in and just, you know, leads and does the right thing at the time. But then if they embed systematic change in the way they're operating, their leadership, and they systematize those components, I think then you have the long lasting effects once the systems are in place. I think the important part is, when they're setting up that systematic change that goes along with their leadership, is that they have the feedback loops in. So when you're transitioning leadership or the environment or the situation changes with your organization, those feedback loops enable for adjustments to happen within the system.
So does the leadership style affects the system, for example? Because as I have seen, systems are, innovative and are developing with every different leader, and also systems should be sustainable, So if the style, the leadership style is different with the different leaders, I think systems will be, or the system will be affected in any organization. So if you have a leader who keeps a certain, or created a certain system in his organization, and then he left the organization, and then comes another leader with a different vision or a different, leadership style, he might make some amendments in the system, and system will be affected. So I think systems, although they are evolving, but at the same time will be affected by the type of leadership style that they, inhabit.
Okay. Very excellent. Thank you so much for this conversation. Someone want to make a final comment before we? Allie, Zachary, Britt, Aaron?
I was just thinking about servant leadership and what it means, and that, you have to be true to your leadership style, right? And what works for you. When a new principal comes in, they're going to have differences, and they can't be a replica of who was there. And I think that's what part of that leadership talks about, and making sure that you are working for you, but have those broad shoulders. We talked a little bit about the courageous conversations that have to happen, that servant leaders have to do. So I'm just, compiling all those things and adding to what goes into being a good leader, how they have to have broad shoulders, how they have to be true to themselves, but see how they fit within the system.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for that. And Mandy, thank you for that question, because that's going to be something that will come up again, and is certainly a question that we need to consider in our roles as leaders, making sure that one of the things that as a building leader, as a district leader, wanting to ensure that there is capacity. And sorry, I don't recall who said this, but making sure that all along the line you have people who have the training or have the disposition, have the skills to step in for certain roles. So if you have a system that you have led that is going well, that you have put in place different different ways to not necessarily protect the system, but certainly allows it to continue to run while the other person gains their footing and assesses the system and determines from that point forward, going forward, what they feel it has value and things that they feel can be improved, because we all know that there is no perfect system. Is there, Doug? Is there a perfect system?
Well, yeah, Doan's pretty close.
True.
Well, I think a couple of things, come to my mind that make me really wonder why we do what we do or the way we do it is that you're talking about a system who already has a clear, well, maybe not so clear, but a defined culture, a set of core values that it operates on, and some guiding principles that are always in place. And those have survived regardless of whether we've got a certain reading series, a certain math series, a certain, those are those core values. And yet when we hire people, we hire them by focusing on the individual instead of trying to match the individual to the core values that we want to sustain. And when hiring practices go wrong, it's because we pick somebody who has a set of core values and guiding principles that don't line up with the school or the system kind of thing. So you have to be, schools, I think, have to be really careful. If you want to change the system, yes, you got to get people with a different set of core values, a different set of guiding principles and the way they define their leadership. But if you're trying to maintain a certain culture, then you've got to hire to that culture. And I don't think we pay enough attention to that.
Great.
That's
Thank
all
you,
I
Doug.
got. That's all I got, and I'm going to go take a nap.
Okay, well, you can't go too far. You're going to be talking in a little, like
Okay.
3 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Appreciate the conversation, the reflection. And as I said, today we are going to again continue our discussions around systems thinking, understanding different organizational models, mental models, and metaphors. And then we are going to circle around to or return to the philosophy of leading. So we'll be talking about that in just a minute. But John, would you share with us the plus deltas that came out of the last session?
Sure. Continued strong support for breakout rooms, especially the idea of learning from each other, not from Trudy and Doug and from me, although I know you value our input. The thought of learning from each other really excites people, especially when people come from such diverse backgrounds and different professional work, learning how that knowledge and wisdom crosses over to each other. So that value of shared learning of the students was again reinforced, and that's been reinforced almost every single class. The second is having a guest speaker come in, especially on the philosophy of leading and helping people kind of see the transparent thinking that somebody else went through. And so that was actually probably the one that was talked about the most or in the greatest depth. And the third is continuing to apply the classwork to current professional work. People saw that as a real value, and it's interesting, it showed up both as a plus and then as a delta, not that we should go away from it, but we should do it more. And the other delta is having a few more breaks during the day. And I do want to remind you that just as if we were in a physical classroom, if you have to get up to refresh your water bottle, go to the restroom, something like that, please take care of those as we go along. If we were in a classroom, we would do that. Zoom is the same way. And then we'll also try to get in some regular breaks where we're all taking a stretch so you don't feel like you've missed something. But those were the major plus deltas. The breakout rooms, the breaks during the day and learning from each other are reoccurring themes throughout all the lessons.
All right. Thank you, John. All right. As I said, we're going to have an opportunity to do some more thinking around the philosophy of leading, what that represents, what that is. And so Doug is going to take you through this and an exercise. There you go, Doug.
Okay, thank you, Trudy. I don't know what you think of this thing called a philosophy of leading, but it's horribly important because not because of the specifics of what it says, but the process of developing it is the key. And the process of developing it is a learning process, and it's best done by a process called curating. Let me tell you how I use curating, and obviously because I use it, it must be the best one. What in the world is up on my screen? I just lost the meeting for some reason. Can you hear me or see me?
We both. The what's up on the screen is what I've got. I'm sharing the slides.
What in the world? Okay, I checked. I'm not a robot. What in the hell's going on? This is weird. Hang on a minute. Oh, wow. Okay, we're back now.
Yeah, you were always there.
Really?
Yes, sir.
It's a good thing I didn't say something that anyway, sorry about that, but for some reason my screen went blank and I had to go through re-entry, and it asked me if I was a robot, and I declined to say that I was a robot, and so it wouldn't let me in. Anyway, let me tell you about how I go through the process of doing something like that called curating. I figure out a system where I can collect everything and anything that strikes me at the time that might be valuable. And even though it may not later be valuable, I record it somehow. For example, I'm trying to right now develop a satisfaction survey of employers of people who hire Doane graduates. And so there are several categories of this. One would be the core values of the person. One would be the work skills of the person. One would be their content knowledge. And so I've got this big sheet of paper that's got 3 columns on it. And every time I would do research or encounter something, I would write it down. And the process of writing it down does something to your subconscious mind, in that after you get going for a while, I couldn't figure out how I was going to organize this thing. And so letting that just kind of set there and not trying to force it, eventually I came up with exactly a scheme that I really like, a scheme that's going to work for us. And but it was a result of going through this curating process. And I probably didn't use only about 1/3 of what I had in my notes. Some of it became frivolous after I figured out the kind of organization of it. But that's what curating is, and that's how I go about it. And it's the best way for me to organize my mind. So what we hope that we can help you do is develop a system of thought, ideas, attitudes, beliefs, and values that give rise to this behavior called leading, because it is a mindset. If your mindset is managing, you see the organization in one way. If your mindset is leading, you see it entirely differently. So it comes out as a statement of your discipline that you intend to practice as a leader. Okay, move the next slide, please. So, I mean, just summarizing that again, it's the way that you think, your ideas, your attitudes, your beliefs, your values, your mindset, because it does impact the way you lead. And we'll talk about how that impacts in just a moment. And it also has to do with how you think about yourself. So a philosophy is something, when we apply it to leading, it's active, and it's present. It is not a future statement. In other words, in a philosophy of leading, you will never say, I will. It's always, I do. In other words, it isn't I will lead, it's I lead. And so, because it has to be that mindset, or you can push it off to the future. Well, I'll take that particular course of leading once this issue is over with. You don't get to do that with your set of core values about leading. So it's not a wish list, it's an is list, that I am this leader. That's what we're trying to get you to do. Okay, next slide, please. So what I want you to do in your breakout groups is to look at leading and leadership, because they're not the same thing. How are they alike? How are they different? Be prepared to report out, and there's a slide that you can record your conversations in. So
yeah,
right. Okay.
It's on the next slide. Yeah.
So go to your breakout room, and we'll give you 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, we're back, Doug.
Okay. Well, you can see a lot of things that the various groups, we won't take time to go through all those. Oh yeah, maybe we should. Let's have one person report out just kind of one key thought from each group in terms of alike and different. So Cedric, Aaron, Elijah, or Scott, please.
I think we just defined it primarily between leadership is really like your core values, your belief system, where leading is more the action, the modeling of the behavior.
Okay, thank you. Zach, Tariq, Dirk, or Muhammad, or Jeff?
So for kind of the alike thing, we kind of came up with the biggest overall idea is both are required for a successful system. You can't have one without the other if you're going to be successful. And then one of the big differences that I kind of liked and gravitated towards, leadership is a concept where leading is the action and demonstrating that concept.
Thank you. Okay, group number 3.
We kind of mirrored what group 2 was saying with regards to, leading is that action, that kind of single concept, while leadership is more that group, that collective thought. A leader is a title, doesn't necessarily say how effective they are, but leadership is when things are running and the system is going smoothly. So kind of viewed leading as lesser than leadership. To get to that level of leadership, you have to be a strong leader.
Okay.
I'm going for group 4. We talked about leading as the action and like what the leader is out doing, describing like what the leader does, and leadership more of that kind of position or that individual, as in like in a building. Brooke mentioned like, what does leadership say? So like thinking of that as like that position kind of way.
Okay, thank you. Group 5.
I can go for group 5. Something that we said that was alike is it's a mindset for both of them. For the leadership, we talked about it being a position and your core values, and leading is actions and implementing those core values.
Okay, thank you. Group 6. Hello, Group 6.
Angie, how about you share?
Sure, I can do that. How they were alike, we talked about how they both have that responsibility. They both signify that there's a higher level of responsibility happening. But then a lot of people are saying it's leading is more of the action. And a phrase we had is that leading is a practice where leadership is the theory.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, thank you. Group 7 had a brilliant conversation.
For our group, it was Britt and Doug and I. We talked a lot about the differences between leading and leadership. That leading is that action or it's the verb, where leadership is the noun. So it's that role or the position. But with being leading, you can still be a leader without the leadership position. And we talked about examples of people who are really driven by their core values and not by their position or political party or agenda, and how they can impact groups of people without having that leadership title.
Thank you. And I think the thing that I want to leave you with in this is that we're going to come back to this. This is part of the curating stage of this. This is a slide you'll probably want to come back to at some point in time to look over and see, if there's something there that you want to include in your definition of leadership, your core values and your guiding principles and so forth. Basically, for our purposes, leadership is the position or the role. And what leadership positions do for you is give you an authority that just leading by itself does not do. However, in a leadership position, you're going to have to do a lot of things other than just lead, and that sometimes can diminish your leadership. Do all of you know people in leadership positions who don't lead? And people who lead who don't have a leadership position? When I was superintendent in North Platte, we had an elementary teacher that didn't take me long to figure out that the way she looked at things and the way that she responded to things was pretty much the way the elementary faculty that was spread out around 11 buildings in the district would think. And it was a person that I needed to get to know on a very personal basis so that I could use her as a feedback to my system of thinking. And Gwen was one of those people that just the way she said it was the way everybody was going to basically receive it. And so the issue of leading had to do with communicating. It had something to do, well, the position, obviously I was a superintendent of schools. I had the authority to do this, but I couldn't get what I wanted to get done by issuing new sets of rules, by saying this is the way we're going to do things, by adopting new policies, even adopting a new program. It was the work of the teachers to look at curriculum, the way they were using instructional activities and programs to basically carry out that curriculum. And she was one of the ones that's kind of gave it the green light or not so green light. And so she was a leader who didn't have a defined position, but she was definitely a leader of the elementary faculty in North Platte. And I hope nobody's related to somebody in North Platte by the name of Gwen, but she was terrific, by the way. But she basically was the weather vane for all of what we did. Okay, so when you look at leading being the behaviors and dispositions exhibited by the leader or by someone else, who may not be in a leadership position. That's what leading is all about. Next slide, please.
Oops, sorry.
I can't think that fast. So for our purposes today, I want you to think about, I hope you're thinking about ways that you can change how you behave or lead. And if you're wondering where do you start, There's two avenues here. Can you think your way into new ways of behaving? Can you behave your way into new ways of thinking? Anybody want to react to that? I'm going to call on somebody.
Yes, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that we should start from the root. I think we cannot change our behavior before we changing our thinking. As Gandhi said, with the change you want to see, we need time and good planning. If I can be open to the other and accept their different idea than what I have, then I will be able to change my behavior. On the other words, I must be positive about who I am talking to and be ready to understand him or her, and I accept what they have, if it's a culture, if it's a words, and so on.
Thank you, Tariq. Anybody else? So you're saying you have to think it through and then behave in line with how you think.
There's a pretty popular book now by James Clear called Atomic Habits, and essentially it's about forming those habits. So that would kind of argue for the behavior path. Just start doing these little habits and they'll compound.
I think that this is impossible to do unless you're being coached.
Oh, interesting. Kim, you always mess up the conversation, so thank you.
That's what I'm here for. No, I think there's no way to change how you think or behave without, video recording yourself running a meeting. Or, I don't know how you can create new habits unless you know the habits that you need to change. And there needs to be some sort of way that you can see where your next step is. And that's either you seeing it or someone else observing you and giving you feedback to know where your next steps may be or where you want to go or how you want to get better. And I mean, honestly, this we need to be coached.
I just want to jump in. I think it speaks back to last month when we talked about Joe Harry's window, and several people in their reflection talked about reaching out to others to see their blind spot. And I think, Kim, you really reinforced that issue of we can't see all aspects of ourselves. So how do we grow in those blind spot areas?
And I'll also say too, that if you address the way you think about something, it's going to impact your behaviors. So you can either start with changing the way you think about something, or you can start by making adjustments with your behavior, and it will impact both sides. But I still think you're going to have a coach to do that. So I'll shut up now.
Don't shut up. That's you. No, you don't want to do that.
I think it goes to intention, right? And that helps decide, why we're trying to make the change. What is going to be, do we need a big plan, or do we just need to start taking those steps and thinking about what we want to change, how we want to change it? So close to that coaching, but also what are the intentions and what are some of the desired outcomes of if you are thinking about it and then changing behaviors, or if it's behaviors then that change your thinking. So I guess I'd argue for both.
I think you have to, I agree with the intentionality. I think you have to think about your thinking and be very purposeful in it, and really be reflective to really decide what is that intended outcome, what are those unintended consequences that could happen, and just being very self-aware and reflective and intentional about where you are and where you want to go.
And how in the world do you think about your thinking?
I think about my thinking often because when you start thinking about a process or a thought or a belief, I want to reflect on why am I thinking about it in this way? and what's driving me to think about it this way. I think you have to be very self-aware and reflective to know this is where I am, and this is perhaps what's driving me to think about it in this way. But if I want to change or build stronger values or a belief system, I have to really think about where I am and where I want to be, and really be aware of that and have that as part of your driving force, I guess.
I'll add this to the conversation. I think that when we think about trying to change the way that we behave or think, we have to go through some type of experience, or some event has to take place for you to even begin to think about your thinking. So I think that it's the experiences that we have. If we think about, if there's some things that we want to change in our schools, okay, what's happening in our schools that cause us to start to think about, okay, what do we need to change or change our behaviors? So I think that there needs to be an experience or event that takes place for this to even begin.
Thank you, Cedric. And Ann, thank you as well.
I would say too, you also have to have a balance between being intrinsically and extrinsically motivated, and what is driving you, because there's going to be lots of things that come up in life, whether it's personal or at work, and it can make whatever you're striving towards, whether it's improving your disposition, your philosophy of leading, or if you're working on improving the system of your organization, whatever the scope is, you have to have that good balance between, what's the motivating factor. Because, it'd be something like, oh, I'm painting my house. So in the moment, it's like, well, this isn't really that enjoyable. And so I need to see what else is motivating me. Like, oh, well, it's going to, add curbside appeal, or it's going to, protect the outside of the house from the elements. And I'm just, improving the home improvement. And so you have to have that good balance between those two, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
I think I'm most easily able to think about my thinking when I am surrounded by people who think differently than me, who raise different ideas than the ones that I have. I feel the same way about, like, on social media, following people who have different perspectives than I do, or different experiences than I do, or even being around people who don't necessarily disagree, but people who are willing to play the role of devil's advocate just to push and challenge my thinking. I don't know. I feel like I'm always grateful when people are willing to play that role and just push me to reflect a little bit in that way.
Thank you, Alyssa.
I think you're bringing up a really good point, that I'm hearing a lot of people say that, like, this is something that we can do on our own. And I actually feel like we have to involve others in order to get better. It's hard to try and adjust our own thinking without including someone else to engage with us. So
yeah, I agree with that, because I was, when you were saying coaching, I'm thinking of a system and working within a system right now, and collaboration helps you change. Just looking at what's listed, ideas and attitudes, to me, that's easy to adjust. It's when you get to your beliefs and values, to the core of who you are, that you might have to shelf a little bit when you're working. But I do think just in collaboration with others, it lets you reflect and change. I don't think ideas and attitudes are tough, as long as you come in with an open mind.
That's an interesting idea of breaking those kind of apart, and understanding how ideas and attitudes are not necessarily easier to change, but certainly, as you say, coming to them with an open mind opens you up to then reflection and the possibility of change. It's the beliefs and values, as you say, those have been mostly embedded in you from your early childhood up until this time. They may morph a little bit, but core values tend to be those that you learn and are or part of your family construct, perhaps. So that's a good point. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, the last 5 of you that have talked are going to flunk the course because you're way too far ahead. You brought up some really interesting points. I think that this is not as cut and dried as sometimes we'd like it. Would you go to the next slide, Trudy, please? Okay, so when you look at this, in terms of changing your behavior, you can either think your way into a new way of behaving. In other words, get an idea, let it percolate enough to change your attitudes, change your beliefs, then change your values, and then it'll change your behavior. Or you can go the other way, which is begin the behavior and let it impact your values, your beliefs, your attitudes, and your ideas. Let me give you a really simplistic example. New Year's resolutions often don't accomplish much of anything. And let's say you this year said, I'm going to get more physically fit. In other words, you have this idea in your mind of who you want to be as a physically fit person. So you start to try to change your attitudes. Well, I read some magazines and I've watched some things on TikTok or whatever it might happen to be about, the ideas of getting more physically fit. It starts to change my attitudes. Yes, this would be good for me. It starts to change my beliefs. Yes, I could be a better person if I'd eat better and exercise. And eventually it affects your values. And once your values are affected, your behavior will be affected. But this going this direction from ideas to attitudes to beliefs to values can take as long as 5 years before the behavior becomes something that's now you and you own it, as opposed to going the other direction, starting with the behavior. In other words, I want to get more physically fit tomorrow. I'm going to get up and walk for a couple of miles down the road and back, or I'm going to do an exercise program and so forth. The minute I'm out there doing that, the questions that are going in my mind is, why am I doing this? What am I doing this for? Well, I'm doing this because I could be a better person. I could be a more healthy individual. I could be a better father, a better husband, a better whatever it might happen to be. And then all of a sudden my beliefs about exercise start to change. I said, this is good for me. And that exercise, simply getting from the couch to the refrigerator, is not sufficient. My attitudes change and so forth. And you go around this way. And that can be a relatively short period of time, as little as 6 months to 3 to 6 months. And so when someone mentioned this, and I should have written it down to remember, someone said, be the change you want to be. When Gandhi was talking about that, he was talking about begin behaving the way you want to see who you are. And you will become that person because of your behavior. So if you're going to serve other people, get out there and serve other people. And it will eventually change this whole system, but it'll do it backwards. The point of the key pointing to values is that values are the key. Until your values change, your behavior will never change, which is the problem with starting to think your way into this. The best way to change your behavior is to do both of these at once. Change your behavior, start changing the way you think. The best way for you to change the way you think is fill in the blank, somebody.
Be coached.
Well, yeah, the point of it is that's going to give you feedback. In other words, you got to get feedback, and you either do it through a personal reflection process, or you go out with Joe Harry Window and say, Joe Harry, give me some feedback, or you get a coach. Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to add be coachable.
What?
I was going to add be coachable.
Right, be coach. There you go. Good point, Scott. In other words, you got to think and you got to behave and you got to do them at the same time in order for that to have the kind of results that you want. So you want to be a better leader? Think about what's the behavior you're going to start giving evidence to others that you're actually in a leading mindset. What is it you think about it? You get feedback from other people. You write in your journal or your reflective process, and then you start that process going around. Next slide, please. So here's the conclusions, and I think those were pretty clear. All sustained behavior comes from values. You won't behave very long in ways that are not aligned with your values. In other words, if you can't get your values aligned to the fact that you're getting up every morning and walking when it's dark outside, you'll skip one day thinking, well, I'll get back to it tomorrow, and then tomorrow, blah, 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 and many of you know how that can go. I've had experience with that myself. Okay, next slide. So what? Here's what I want you to do. And this is part of your reflection assignment for for this month to turn into your readers sometime. I want you to reflect on the notion of, okay, so we looked at philosophy of leading in a different way. So in your reflection, you're going to talk about, well, what happened as a result? What does my leading look like? What does my leading feel like? What does my leading sound like? And then any other thoughts. And don't stress yourself about those things. In other words, write what comes to your mind. You can curate it later, but until you can basically give some thought to, if someone else was looking at me leading, what would they see? If someone else was beside me, coaching me, how would that feel? How would it sound? Those are things that you've got to come to grips with in order to become the leader that's inside of you. Questions? Okay. Trudy, back to you.
All righty, great. Fantastic conversations again. Just really appreciate you folks sharing your thoughts and your reflections on your practice, on others, and just good conversations. Okay, 15-minute break. We'll come back at 9:50 and we will talk about icebergs. All right. Thanks. See you in 15. That was great, Doug. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that's what.
Okay. Not quite all back. Oh. Give them another 20 seconds or so. Okay, I hope most of you are back. We're going to forge ahead with one of the readings that we asked you to do, The Tip of the Iceberg by David Hutchins. As he mentioned in the afterword, basically, that he, or the discussion part, that it was an allegory. Allegory is utilizing metaphors to illustrate an idea or a concept or the story. And in this situation, it's an allegory illustrating systems thinking. One other allegory that comes to my mind, something that I read when I was in high school, I think it was, it's Animal Farm. I think that's probably one of the more classic uses of allegory to tell a story, to tell about a concept. So allegory. For this, it's all about systems thinking, systems thinking. So remind us, what is systems thinking? Kim, what is one thing that you know about systems thinking?
Muted. It requires a lot of communication as well as a vision that is shared.
Okay, Jeff, what's one thing about systems thinking that you would identify?
Sorry, I was chewing. One of the main things that I kind of took away from the systems thinking, specifically from the tip of the iceberg, is how we tend to see things from our own perspective many times when within a system. We're kind of caught in that sometimes euphoric feeling, like when they're getting all the clams and things like that. So when we're doing a good job and not recognizing some of the things that are around us that are failing, if you will, running out of real estate, the penguins getting sat on, things like that, where we as humans and individuals a lot of times get caught up with what's going on with ourselves in our own lives a lot, and how we cannot see the system starting to fail around us, if you will. So.
Okay. So Hutchins brings out that systems thinking is a way of seeing things that helps us understand complex patterns. And for him, it's the complex patterns of cause and effect. If this happens, then. If this happens, then. So again, it's a way of recognizing how things are connected. And so that's the piece of systems I think that we can all recognize, is the interconnectedness of systems. There are benefits to the organization when we have systems thinking. So Miranda, what would be one of those benefits that you can think of that came out of what Hutchins said?
I think one of the things we can think about is how even when you think you are a silo or you're by yourself, how you are connected and how that interconnected kind of affects everything.
Okay. Aaron, what would be a benefit to the organization with systems thinking?
That within a systems process, there's usually the feedback. And so it gives you the opportunity to identify the problem and respond effectively rather than thinking it's like an isolated incident. So I would say that feedback loop.
Okay. Dirk, what are your thoughts about benefits to an organization?
When I think about the book and the benefits, I think about how it encourages us to dig deeper. So not only looking at patterns, but also looking at the underlying structure. And then beneath that, I can't find my visual of it. You had your patterns, your structure. What came after that?
Events.
the events, and then
Events, pattern, structures. Yeah.
and thank you. And then being able to form your vision from there.
Okay. Shuli, what would be one thing that you can recognize as a benefit to systems thinking to an organization? You're on mute, Shuli.
To me, really, when I think of the system and its benefits, it's how it encompasses us versus I. It's not a one person's job, but it's all of us included. That's how I think of the benefits of the system.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things that really became clear within the allegory and talking about or showing systems thinking was how important it is to anticipate unintended consequences of one's actions. So that would be another benefit that Hutchins points out. And then what are the underlying causes that drive our behaviors? And then, of course, to make better decisions. So it helps us really to recognize what is, so then we can figure out better approaches and then create what it can be. So a goal, what's the goal? So just to bring us back around to systems, what are the basic components to a system? Zachary, what's one? What's the basic components to a system?
You have subsystems that are interconnected, but one thing that I like that they mentioned in the book when they were trying to analyze the system is that they really focused on the goal or the intention.
Right, so has a purpose, right?
Yes.
Has an intention. It's interrelated. Okay, Matt's, what's another one?
The shared vision, shared underlying beliefs.
Okay.
Shared goals.
Okay, Jessica, what's another one? You're on mute.
Sorry.
That's all right.
That everyone has like a job and everybody has a purpose. It helps everyone feel valued.
Okay. Brad, what's one more?
Just think of systems as inputs, processes, and outputs.
Okay. And something that we talked about last month was how it seeks stability, how it wants to be a stable system. So if there's an irritant, it's going to do something about it, right? It's going to try to come back to that homeostasis existence. So taken too far, this kind of need to be stable could create resistance to change. And I think that's something that we saw within this allegory as well. And then of course, those feedback loops, those are all important to understanding systems or recognizing them. So one of the things that Hutchins brings out, excuse me while I manipulate all these little buttons that I've got here. Is linear versus more complex thinking. So A causes B. It's very attractive in its simplicity, but reality is that there are multiple causes and effects. So systems thinking assumes that there are going to be numerous complete or complex factors in play within an organization. So to sort through the complexity in order to take an appropriate action to get the results, we need to look at these causes and effects, right? So this is the causal loop diagram that Hutchins proposed or used to diagram or illustrate what was happening within this iceberg system. So you have reinforcing processes, right? And so that's what you see on, I think it's the left of your screen, right? So you have the appeal of the iceberg, the number of penguins and walruses, reinforce then the number of clams that are available, and that's supposed to then increase the appeal of the iceberg, right? So that is a virtuous cycle. What's a vicious cycle, Cedric?
Are we talking in terms of this diagram right here?
Yeah.
Or just in general?
No. Well, either one. Either one.
Okay. I'm just looking at the overall cycle of how everything is working. So when one thing causes something else to interact in the system, and it just continues to keep going. And unless you have some feedback, then this cycle won't change. It would just continue to keep doing what it's intended to do.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, they added more, as they got more penguins on the island, then they didn't realize that that iceberg was starting to sink, and those things that were underneath, nobody could realize that until somebody stepped outside and started thinking outside the box, like, why is this happening? And then started to implement some feedback into the system, and then it started to change.
Right. Right. So you're going to have reinforcing processes and then balancing processes, right? So the balancing processes are there to stop the vicious cycle from occurring, because the vicious cycle is when negatives pile up on negatives, impacts within a system. So the balancing processes, which are illustrated on the right, that's going to allow, hopefully, to keep the system at a certain level of performance. So you bring in those factors that are going to balance it out. So the narrative within to explain the causal loop is here. This is something that, again, Hutchins provided. So the number of penguins and walruses increase, the number of clams increases too, and as the available clams increase, the appeal of the iceberg also increases. So that's why it's considered a virtuous cycle. It's a reinforcing cycle, but the positive word of mouth causes the number of penguins and walruses to increase, right? So as those increase, and as this is what Cedric mentioned, their combined weight approaches the iceberg's limit. So then that causes the iceberg to sink, and then the amount of available space decreases. And that results in infighting, which reduces the appeal. So it becomes this almost a vicious cycle in terms of the negativity that's introduced into the feedback loop. So essentially, as the penguins learned, we become trapped in or by systems when we fail to understand them. So the more we understand systems and the underlying systemic structures, the more leverage for change that we have. So as we recall Daniel Kim, how do we become better designers of systems rather than the mere operators of the system? So we work on the systems and not in the systems. The more aware we become of underlying systemic structures, the more leverage we have to change the processes. One of the other aspects to systems that Hutchins brings out is this whole addressing symptoms instead of systems. So he brings out, or he talks about, the role of high-priced management consultants. So here we have this consultant coming in and saying, well, this is the way you need to do it. This is this is why it's happening, so this is what you're going to do. But instead of really addressing the issue, it just makes things worse. The fighting only got worse. And then you have to have the courage to question. This is another part of the lesson. So the role of pondering or reflective thinking, we have to somehow have done this to ourselves. And I forget what this penguin's name is. But this is the penguin that interjected reflection. Really having to ask those questions. What is going on? What's going on? So within the iceberg, as Dirk brought up, you have events, things that we see on the top. These are the things that are visible at the top of the iceberg. And then you have patterns. Those are just below the surface. Those are events that are occurring over time. And then you have structures that drive the patterns. So to act more effectively, when we identify these components, you either redesign or you create a new system. So this is what we're going to ask you to do. And I'm sorry I haven't monitored chat. So if there's something I need to pay attention to, John, would you let me know? What I'm going, yes, there is something we need to say.
No, I meant.
Okay, all right, thank you. What you're going to discuss in your breakout rooms are these two ideas. Thinking about your organization or your patch on the iceberg, so to speak. What kinds of processes, structures, and beliefs make it difficult to recognize and respond appropriately to feedback? And then also, what tools, whether they be mental models or metaphors, have you acquired as a result of this course that can be used on those big, jagged icebergs of systems that we inhabit? So thinking about your organization, what kinds of processes, structures, and beliefs make it difficult to recognize and respond appropriately to feedback? And then what tools can you use on those new systems, on those systems that we inhabit? Questions? Okay, I think I have about, let's see, 30 minutes I think I have for this. So I'll check in at 20 and see where we are. Okay, so if there are no questions.
Do we want to capture the ideas and put them into a Google Doc for the next slide, or do we just?
Yeah, so you'll have a document that you're going to use to capture your thoughts, and then you'll link it to the next slide. Yes, thank you. All right, I think we have everything. All right.
Anything?
I heard some pretty good stuff. Did you?
I did. Part of the when you talked about their out in Grand Island, so it was interesting.
Okay, if you guys didn't before, I hope you identified a spokesman for the group. So for each group, I'll ask just to summarize the conversation that you had, perhaps pulling out one key idea about the processes, structures, and beliefs that make it difficult to respond appropriately, and then maybe one tool that you folks would be able to use on the system. So we're going to start with group 7 this time.
Were we group 7? I think we were group 7. I don't know.
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. I thought so. I forgot to write it down this time. So we talked a lot. Angie had a great example in regards to the fact that her school district is looking or is using an outside kind of agency to do kind of an outside in look on things that potentially is going to be making some changes that the internal teachers and admin and stuff are not necessarily comfortable with, and how that is very much a mechanical look at things because it's numbers and it's money and it's those kinds of things. But then when you try to combine that with more organic kind of stuff, which is humans, it doesn't always necessarily correlate all together. And so sometimes that feedback gets unnoticed, or it goes kind of on the wayside without necessarily looking at things. So and each of us had a really good example where that was kind of very similar. And then for our metaphor, a couple of really good ones. We talked a little bit about Anne thinks about a canoe, and she's kind of moved towards a sailboat in regards to the different parts that need to kind of be put together and moving. And Zach had a really great one that I hadn't really thought of, is a clock versus a cloud, where a clock is more mechanical and you can take it apart and you can put it right back together and it's kind of all the same and it's not broken if you do that. Whereas a cloud, you can't really do that with, right? Like you start messing with it and then it's no longer the same thing that it was originally. So those were kind of the two metaphors that we talked about.
Nice. All right. Thank you. Group 6.
I can go for group 6. We had really good conversation and came up with a lot of examples about systems and the processes and structures that maybe we've had a little bit of difficulty with and changing systems, and about the bigger picture and how when one thing happens, it just creates this domino effect, how all those things are interconnected. And we really at the end came up with the phrase humans are hard, because it's the human, it's our personalities and all of those things that fit together that cause changes to work together or not. And a metaphor we came up with that connects with that was actually from class. One of our readings was the cockroach theory, and that little cockroach sitting on your shoulder. Are you going to respond or are you going to react? And when creating systems and thinking about systems thinking, how are we going to respond and work with those humans that are hard to get our system where we need it to be?
Yeah.
Nice.
I like that. Humans are hard. We're not all the same. We have messy emotions. Our perceptions are different. Our perspectives are different. Yeah, that's I like that one. Humans are messy, definitely. Group 5.
I can go for us. So we had a couple thoughts on kind of the issues we have with taking our feedback and be able to respond and recognize that appropriately. One of the things we talked about at length was when we do get that feedback and we try to put it in the loop to correct things, where a structure of the system is working against us and not enabling us to make those kind of changes. So we're getting the feedback we need. And then when we go to implement it, there's things in place that stop us, whether that be, implementing a new policy, implementing new programs, money, a lot of times things like that. And then a lot of us gravitated towards the metaphors as tools. I think most of us agreed that this class is really big with a lot of big ideas, and it's going to take us time to digest everything and put it into daily practice for ourselves. But I think a lot of us gravitated towards the metaphors and how we can identify, almost instant things within our organization that relate to one another, that are different than one another, and how those are going to affect our individual systems and structures, and then even silos within those.
Good, good, good. Group 3.
We talked about most of those things. I don't want to repeat. I guess Doug brought up a really good point in ours about immediacy and thinking about time, what came before whatever is happening in the moment, and what led up or escalated to it. We talked about how sometimes you only see the obvious of what's happening. Like, I suppose on the iceberg, you only see the top, but you don't see the root causes. Yeah.
Okay. Group 2.
The big themes for our group for what kinds of processes, structures, and beliefs make it difficult to recognize and respond appropriately to feedback. One of the big ones was the belief that this is the way it's always been done, so we can't change it, which will lead into outlearning the wolves. And lack of trust and support, another big one that can prevent responding to feedback. And so some tools that we looked at that can help navigate our own individual icebergs is really utilizing these mental models and causal loop diagrams, like bringing structure to something. Because like in my own science department, whenever we have meetings for whether it's for curriculum or improving things in the labs, it's always throw out some ideas, and it's just like blindfold and throw a dart and not even paying attention to really any of the consequences that might happen. And one policy our chair did for the anatomy labs was to remove all the stools to prevent the students from sitting down, because he was tired of them just sitting like bumps on a log. And I'm going, that's going to go over well. And there were a lot of complaints, especially from some pregnant students who wanted to sit down. But just helping to see what are those unintended consequences by like modeling out. And so I really see a value in being able to use those mental models and causal loop diagrams, so you can actually see, okay, we have an idea, what might be some of those consequences, instead of just reacting, and then we can see those deeper patterns below the iceberg, the patterns and the system structures that keep causing those events in the first place, so you can have some more lasting changes.
Okay,
and better changes, I should say.
Yeah. Group 1.
Our group talked a lot about the system structures and how hierarchical the systems can be, and they're not like flat organizations, as in there's lots of steps within, and how sometimes even small issues or ideas, and you want to create changes to the systems, but it's not part of your tower in a sense, because there's multiple divisions within an organization. How that information then has to feed up into vice presidents and deans, and then it has to go over and through the system, which then decisions are often made by people in power that don't know the fine details. And how can you recreate or draw attention to those things by diagramming out systems to hopefully show either flatten the organization or create ways that systems can connect at the lower levels without having to go through higher up administration to address things. And maybe how do you build in feedback loops across the lower levels that are across the division lines without having to go up the structure. So that we talked a lot about organizational structure and how that influences the systems.
Okay. So what were some of the, what were some of the specific processes or structures, beliefs that made it difficult, that you identified that would make it difficult to respond or recognize feedback? Anybody? Just throw out a couple.
We talked a little bit about the squeaky wheel. Is the feedback coming from the right source? Is it from a school board member who heard something from one person, or someone who's very vested in the classroom teacher? I think that depends. And sometimes it's the position that the person is in who gives the feedback, that yes, that has to be responded to, but that might not be the most pressing need. So I think looking at where the feedback's coming from is also important.
Okay. A couple more people. What are processes, structures, or beliefs that are getting in the way?
One thing, oh, go ahead, Tariq.
Oh, thank you. In group 4, we honestly we had just similar idea with the group 2. So, and the most important thing was about the feedback. So that if you do not ask about feedback, you don't know where you are. Then it's a feedback. It's not act. It's a fact. So try to be real with the feedback.
Okay, Jessica.
One of the things that we talked about was, as you're getting feedback and making a change to the system, looking at how that one change affects other parts of the system too, and where you might have to make further change to additional systems because of the initial change you've made.
Okay. Any final thoughts on processes, structures, or beliefs?
I can go.
Okay.
Also, in group 5, we also talked about, the difficulty in responding for this feedback. Also, the one problem is whether the feedback itself is incorporated in the organization's culture, and also the bureaucracy of some of the organizations, whether they, they are champion for feedback or encouraged feedback or not from the employees. And also the vulnerability of the leadership itself. So are they the people who actually are encouraging feedback from their employees? So all these things affect how, people respond, to the feedback of the organization, of the, for feedback of the system, to their support, to their leaders and so on. So whether it is incorporated in the organization's culture and whether they embrace, this feedback, and also the bureaucracy, and also whether the leaders are vulnerable or open, to receive these feedbacks.
Very good. Thank you.
Trudy,
All right.
I was just wondering, like, I don't know, a lot of people, a lot of different experiences, but like how high up do we see the system going? And we talked earlier about education maybe being an archaic system or things like that, but like, what is the system level that we change or truly improve our education system, that when we don't have so much control over a lot of that? So we're all looking kind of at the building district level, but at what time does it tie in with the state systems of education or the federal systems of education, that we can, in some ways, I don't want to say stop following the rules, but are having rules defined that get in the way of or don't really enhance our systems?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the ways that we can truly impact, and Doug, John, please chime in as well. when there are practices that are demonstrated are demonstrating success in whatever metric you want to use, but when there are programs that have been placed or systems that have been inputted that really have an impact on whether it's culture, whether it's outputs, or those are the things that are noticed. Those are the things that end up in Ed Week. Those are the things that end up in national headlines. Those are the things that result in, what's this gentleman's name? Is it John Clark, somebody Clark, that has that program about being effective teachers, and the school in, what is it, Harlem, that, you know, those programs, those processes, the systems that make such an impact that it becomes known nationally. Those are the things that are going to be recognized or noted. So you start, whether you start small, but it's how you work within, you work in your school district, on your system, and then that ultimately becomes a model for others and are adopted or talked about at least. John, Doug?
Well, that's an interesting question, because what Trudy said is true. And then you lay over the top of the fact that there is a legitimized structure for a state education system in the Constitution of Nebraska. In fact, the public schools could not exist without the constitutional provision for public education. What I think has had the most impact on education the last 15, almost now 20 years, is the federal impact, and there's no constitutional provision for a federal system of public education. Yet, if you want Title I money, you do the things that they ask you to do. If you want Title III or whatever title it might happen to be, you're going to have standards, you're going to have an assessment system, on and on and on. And so by default, they've created a federal system. And I think it's very difficult to make those meet, especially in a state, Midwest, small state, that doesn't need that kind of intervention and make it work. Of course, I don't know where you can make that stuff work. It's so regulated that you can't, you almost feel like you're tied up to a tree and can't move. But I don't know, that I think the best antidote we have for that are strong local public schools.
I would just add more of a philosophical piece that actually I'm going to quote Doug on. He can deny it, but I swear he said this, and it might even have been this same class several eons ago. That one of the biggest issues with public schools is that it's a reactive organization, not a proactive organization, that we don't move until at least 51% of the population believes in moving forward, because we are a public entity led by elected officials. And so rarely do we lead, so often do we follow. And it takes a very special leader that can motivate the local populace at the local level. And that's why, in some ways, I think Trudy's examples being so specific to specific geographic areas is because they were able to move a small area forward with a vision that captured that small area. But that's harder to do at the federal level with the bureaucracy. So it takes, to be active, almost takes that active, proactive, visionary leader at the local level.
I think it's a classic example of, we act like the cockroach theory of being reactive as opposed to proactive. Because I think, I don't care what state regulation it is or what federal regulation is, there's a way to adapt those things so that they don't do the harmful things that they can easily do, and they do good things. I don't think that having an assessment system means that there's a single state test. Now, there's a heck of a lot of work to be done if you don't want to do that kind of a system, but I think there's always proactive ways to deal with every regulation that comes down. And we don't do that. We just simply say, well, let's figure out a way to get by. And I worry about special education, who's done absolutely miraculous job of responding to the federal guidelines, but I don't know that I'd want a kid to feel like they had to have an IEP to get the kind of service they need, and there's something wrong with them and they need to be taken out of class in order to be served. I don't think I would want that. And yet some of the things that they do with kids with disabilities, I think are just incredibly good things to do, but trying to get them done in the classroom, trying to get them done in ways that don't single the child out, have not been overly successful.
The catch is where it's tied to all the funding. School districts will want to try to do what's best for their students, but there's that big hand over it that says you have to have the money in order to have the resources. And if the money is tied to a certain agenda, then your hands are tied to some extent.
Well, let me give you an example. Way back in ancient history, right after the Civil War, when No Child Left Behind came out, every state but us adopted a state test. And I remember standing in the office of the US Secretary of Education, and I said, you try to withhold special ed money from us, and you will see that there is a federal entitlement that belongs to the kids of Nebraska. You have to give them that money. You can't withhold it because of a condition you've added on to something. Well, 30 days later, he calls me on the phone and says, you were right. And I said, well, I'm not trying to be a bad person or an irritant here, but I'm trying to get you to understand that there's certain things we can do and will do, and there's certain things we won't do. And we will not use our special ed kids as leverage to get money. You owe us the money for every child from 3 to 21 who has an identified disability condition. That money is entitled to us by the Constitution, right? And he said, yeah, you're right. So I think sometimes we don't, when we get reactive, like the cockroach thing, it's because we don't fully understand. And sometimes I think the reactive position is easier. That shut down conversation, didn't it?
Oh.
I'm just in awe because I think it's awesome what you did to advocate for our students. And I wish more leaders in leadership positions would adopt that same philosophy of finding a way through the bureaucracy of it all.
Well, somebody mentioned that everybody in an organization is human. And I took that approach when I went to Washington, and I didn't feel that way before. But approaching those folks as humans made a difference. Some of them didn't deserve that approach. I'm sorry, that wasn't as funny as I thought it was. But because every one of the people in, whether it's be Congress or whether it's in the president's offices, the executive offices and all that, every one of those people are human beings. And so often we don't treat them that way and then wonder why we get the reactions that we do. And it didn't work with every one of them, but the more I got to know them as individuals, the better off we were. And there was times though that regardless of whether I knew them or not, it was time to put my foot down. And I often wondered if I was going to leave one of my feet in Washington, D.C., but I didn't.
All right. Thanks, guys. We're going to move on to symptoms thinking. So thinking about your organizations, describe an example where symptoms thinking actually trumped systems thinking, that it overrode that. How did it come about, and what can be done to reduce the likelihood of the quick fix in the future? Like that, was it Hans? I think somebody came up with his name, the gentleman who is the outside expert who came in. So again, describe an example where symptoms thinking trumped systems thinking. How did it come about? And what can be done to reduce the likelihood of the quick fix in the future? We're going to give you just 10 minutes for this conversation, and we'll come back out and quickly share out. Okay, questions? Okay, 10 minutes. John, stick around for just a minute.
Was it good, Kelly?
It was good. So we did our first hybrid, and we had 240 in attendance and about 100 in person. So it was really, really cool to see that work. Most everybody in education has their vaccine. So my group wasn't, uptight necessarily, but I would tell you Orlando as a whole is a little crazy because I'm pretty sure they don't think the virus exists anymore.
Pretty sure you're accurate.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to call on a few folks to share your thoughts about symptoms thinking, trumping, or interfering with systems thinking. So Angie, what did you share, or what came out of your group? It doesn't matter.
We shared a variety of examples of just quick decisions just to take care of immediate issues without really thinking of the long-term effects of that. And then also with the quick turnover of administrators in a building, how sometimes you just are fixing things at the time, but to have that long-range vision is hard when, a principal's time in a building could only be like 3 to 4 years, and then you've got a new leader in there, and so making those long-term systems decisions and plannings is hard at times.
Okay, Brittany.
So our group talked about a bunch of different examples, and I thought Doug kept bringing us back around and just asking questions. And one of the things we kind of ended on was Muhammad had a great point about his brother and how he works at a plant, and they were losing a lot of people, and so they increased the pay, and it had kept some people. And Doug said, so as we have a teaching shortage that will be coming in the next few years, would increasing the pay keep promoting to have teachers come? And one of the things we were talking about here at the end was just saying, is it in the environment or the pay? And I just thought it's interesting that a lot of times we treat symptoms thinking in certain ways, but it may not actually fix the whole systems thinking. Just like the reaction would be, oh, we need to increase the pay, but really it's more about the environment, or getting back to why teachers love to teach. So that was kind of where our discussion went.
Okay, thank you. Yulia.
Yeah, we talked about a couple examples, and then Alyssa, mentioned also about sometimes it is hard to work on the system when you are in the system. So it is important to have time to work on the system. Yeah.
Okay, Mandy.
So what we talked about is sometimes this, and we talked specifically about the issue of cultural competency, and the symptom may be verbalized discontent by students or others. And the way we've addressed the symptom is by setting tight boundaries for what conversations are allowable and are not in a classroom setting. And so you confine the symptom, but you don't deal with the system.
Yeah, good. So Ernie, what can be done to reduce the likelihood of a quick fix?
I think it takes that constant evaluation, feedback within your system, and not losing sight of what you're trying to accomplish or what the purpose of your system is. Two things we talked about in our group is just in school system, how there's an ever-changing leadership, both at the district and building levels. And Kim sent out that article earlier where about 42% of principals wanting to leave. Those statistics are out there, and superintendents are much different. So systems get a consistent, or the thing that's probably most consistent is leadership change within school systems, and how that can change the system, as well as not looking for the magic bullet, but looking at the people and the resources you have within your system to make effective change.
All right, excellent. Thank you all for that. All right, before we head into the next activity, which is around mental models, we're going to take a quick break, stretch break, walk around, take care of personal needs. We'll be back in, let's go 4 minutes. So just before 11:30, let's come back, okay? Shoot. All right, so fun part here. The guess who? Our guesser, unfortunately, is absent. So we're going to pick 2 new people. So our guesser is going to be Brooke. Is she here?
Yep.
All right, Brooke, here we go. This person has been married for 25 years. This person has been deployed as part of a combat force on every continent except Australia and Antarctica. And this person loves coaching wrestling. Who is that?
Ernie.
You are right on the first guess. Good job. So let's learn more about Ernie. Brooke, what questions would you ask?
Ernie, what were you in Army? What Army, infant, or you know what I mean, Marines, Navy?
I was in the Army.
Are you born and raised in Nebraska? Where are you from?
I'm originally from the northeastern part of North Dakota, about 6 miles from Canada and 13 miles from Minnesota.
What made you come to Nebraska?
I've been on a journey southern since I started. My wife and I did most of our teaching in South Dakota, trying to find basically places that we could both teach, and then trying to find places that I can be an administrator and she can teach. So kind of has been on a southern progression.
Do you have any kids?
I have 5. One is the oldest one is 24. He's in Kentucky. The second one just graduated from airborne school in the Army, so I don't know where he's headed to next. And the other 3 are still in sophomores through 6th grade.
I have a lot of questions. This normally is where I would say something smart ass and try and be funny, but it's too, I'm not feeling it. Let's see. Are you nervous about your son or daughter being in the military after you've been in the military?
Nope, that's his mom's job.
Cool. I don't really have any other questions. What's your favorite part about education?
The kids, just watching them learn, watching them grow, watching them come back after they're done.
What's your least favorite part about being a principal?
Those situations that you want to fix that you can't. Mostly for kids.
Do you have anything else you want to tell us that you think would be cool for us to know?
No, not really.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Ernie, so you said you've been married for 25 years, correct?
Yep.
So we have Meredith who just got engaged. What advice would you give her?
It's easiest to marry a military guy that has probably been gone about 16 years of his marriage. That helps it last a lot longer.
Well, I already messed up.
My wife and I do joke about that we've been married for 25 years and we've been together for about 15. So
Where was your favorite deployment?
I actually went to Bosnia Herzegovina twice. So I was there early, and then going back probably about 8 years later was kind of really interesting to go back. It's the only place I've ever been twice. And so it was just really interesting going back, seeing both the progress and lack of progress.
What was the coolest thing that you saw? Like out of all the places that you got to visit, where was the one that just blew your socks off?
Probably the ruins of the Winter Olympic facilities in Sarajevo. How just you would have never guessed that the places that they housed or hosted the Olympics, and just the destruction of everything that was there in relation to that.
Are you going to plan a trip to Australia or Antarctica?
Antarctica, no. I kind of would like to check Australia off my bucket list, just because I did get to work with the Australian Army a little bit once, and actually got to jump with some of their guys. And so I do have some people that I stay in loose contact with there that I think it'd be fun to go there and just kind of reunite with some of those guys.
Any other questions? Trudy, I think you're on mute. I don't know if you're talking to us or.
Trying to do a couple things at the same time and it's messing me up. So being present, that's what you need to do. I'm telling you. Okay, thank you very much for the questions. And as always, very interesting. I love hearing more about our folks that we are spending our Sundays with once a month or more. Thank you very much. So Ernie, you're going to be our guesser next time. So we'll see how well you do. Brooke knocked it out of the park right away. Okay, now that we are back, I'm just gonna try to get set up again. Yeah. I'm gonna stop talking while I get things figured out here. Okay. Share my screen and no, that's not it. That's not what I wanted. Get rid of that.
I did want to preface the supplemental text as you go in. We had talked earlier, Kim brought it up with coaching is necessary for growth. To grow yourself, you need help with coaching. As you go into the supplemental text, you'll be having some common threads from the books that you read that are similar, but push each other a little bit on learning about systems. You gathered a great deal. Help each other process through that verbally. The more people just talk aloud about what they think they understand really helps them process it in a way they can't do internally. So the best thing you can do for the people in your group is to ask them some questions about how this fits into what they've learned so far with systems, even if they're not sure what the answer is. Checking in their own heads with where they are with systems will help them grow as they go forward. So take on a role in the supplemental text groups as that coach, as that cognitive coach to help people process their reading in the framework of systems.
Okay, so we're going to give you, we're going to shoot for an hour, so 60 minutes. There is a link to a Google Doc in that text. So if you would please, before the end of May, make sure that you have linked the document that you have put your bulleted list or your narrative, however you wanted to respond to this. Link that to that document so others may check that out if they're interested in learning about your book or reading the book that you chose for your supplemental text. So in the breakout room, again, as John mentioned, you are going to share about the book, identify things that were important, especially about leading, but systems thinking, if it had something in there about systems thinking or systems, leadership or leading. So those are the things that we hope that you were able to take away from the book that you chose. Okay, I think I have all of the groups created correctly. And again, 1 hour. So at about 1:45, we'll come back. Okay, thanks.
It didn't prompt me to go to a breakout room, Trudy.
Okay, so you must have been out when I assigned again. So I'm sending you there.
Cool.
Okay. So it might not end up being an hour, but we're going to go for that for right now. May just be 50 minutes. So I'll check in the groups, see how they're doing, maybe bringing them back. But some of them only have 4 members because of absences. So anyway. Okay, I'm gonna look or work on getting that Mentimeter thing set up. So, and you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm gonna jump from room to room then.
Okay, all right. See you in a bit. Okay.
Oops.
Okay. I think everyone is back. All right. So I'm hopeful that you heard about books that piqued your interest and that you will find that they have the same impact or the same lessons for you, or perhaps you will find other lessons. The supplemental text is always a way for us to provide opportunities beyond the shared experience, so a little bit more of an individual experience. And hopefully the books that you choose do enlighten you in an area that you have specific interest in. I will ask, I added this statement to the slide. If you would please make sure you share the document. As I was checking, there were several that I had no access. I could not access it. So please make sure that folks have access to that, to your documents. This is a way for them to get more specific information about the book that they may have heard something about. So want to make sure that everyone has that opportunity to go looking.
Trudy, did you say that's due before the end of May or the end of April?
Certainly has to be there before the end of May, but end of April is fine too. I mean, whenever you can get it done, but certainly before the end of May.
Okay.
That's
thanks.
the end of the class, so.
Yeah.
And happy if you want to send it in and get some feedback in the intervening time.
Definitely. Okay, do want to provide you with this opportunity to do the walk the beach. And John, could you set this up? Sorry, while I get the breakout rooms ready.
Absolutely. We continue the conversation about systems and want to keep pushing each other to think more deeply and more deeply about systems and their implications. And there's lots of conversation today about when you looked at symptoms, systems based on symptoms, you have your virtuous and vicious cycles and how those play out in the work you see at your work or that you read about in your text. In the groups I sat in on, they did a really good job of starting to pull apart what was in the book and what the implications for that knowledge might be in understanding systems. So as you go into the breakout room, each person has about 10 minutes and you're looking at two particular questions. So as a person that's sharing, kind of watch your own time to try to fit within these two questions. One is that systems are complex, but thinking in systems terms may be easier. And that's where the mental models and the cycles help to break it down into the small pieces. I'm thinking about this one reinforcing loop or balancing loop or linear system. I think I can make better use of the metaphors or those mental models by doing what to help me break down that complexity. And then the second is I need to create feedback loops for my leading. In order to do that, I am going to, and one of the things I heard many people talking about was about Johari's window, and this last week with reflections and how that can create a loop. So think about what feedback loop would be beneficial to you as far as a leader to help you be a more effective leader. So again, trying to look at systems in the contextualization of your leadership role in the work you do. Any questions? Again, 10 minutes, practice your reading or listening, pardon me, not your reading, you're listening, and then switch roles.
Okay, I have one that needs a partner, John, so that's all right.
That's great.
Okay, very good. 20 minutes, folks, all together.
Kylie, why are you pushing him out?
Sorry, I shouldn't encourage, I guess. Oh my gosh, how fun.
Oh.
All right, I think we are back. So I hope again that Walk the Beach, sorry. There. Was an exercise that still has value and meaning for you folks. It is always something that I feel brings a little bit more focus and opportunity for you to get your thoughts and your thinking out there. So we are winding down and it's time to share your big ideas or ahas. So I have a Mentimeter link here. I don't know that I can put it in the chat. Let's try it. Okay, and if you would please, if you have one word, great. If you have a short phrase, again, that's fine. But if you would please identify one big idea that's really clear to you and one thing that I still want to learn more about. So let's do an or, either or on that instead of both. My word cloud's going to be too big. So let's see. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, systems, mental models, interconnected.
Can you say the prompt again?
Sure. In one word or a short phrase, what's one big idea that's really clear to you now? Or what is one thing that you still want to learn more about?
Where do you write them?
Once you get to www.menti.com, put that code in and then you'll just type
Okay,
into the
let me
box.
see. So this one, okay, let me see here. Hmm.
This is great. Iceberg. So mental models and feedback loops or versus feedback loops. Systems, symptoms, showing up more than once it appears. Power of the metaphor. Yeah, definitely. Metaphors as a tool. Systems are very complex. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you for that. All right. Just to take a bit of time to review what we're asking you to do in your Zoom groups, Zoom conversations. The leader is bolded and in green. So as usual, they're the ones who will set up the Zoom meeting and then report the group work. And I want to make sure that the work that you do, the document that you create, whatever that might be, make sure that you share it with the 3 professors. We want to make sure that we have access to that. It's just, it helps bring back to us, especially those of us who don't always, that miss the meetings. It's important for us to see what you are bringing out of your readings and the discussions. So please do that. All right, so the first thing are quotes. So you are assigned a quote for leading in systems. So as a group, you are going to discuss this particular quote and come up with what that means for leading in systems. So actually you'll have 2. You'll have one that's assigned to you, and as you can see on this slide, you have a second quote that's assigned to all of you. The quote by W. Edwards Deming. Okay. The next activity is then to share the quotes that you have identified from the tip of the iceberg and Outlearning the Wolves. So the quote that you chose, you're going to share with them, explain why you chose the quote, and then also make sure that you add your quotes to the leadership quote document. That document that we've been using to collect the quotes that you find in your readings and the articles, whether it be your supplemental text, perhaps, certainly these 2 books, and then any of the articles, any quotes that strike you as something that you'd like to recognize or highlight. And then the articles that were in the Google Classroom, Leadership's Dirty Little Secret and What is Leadership, those 2 articles, you have some specific questions to respond to. At the link is a YouTube video, so please take a look at that and then discuss these questions as a group. And then finally, you have a series of articles, 2 of which I've just added in the last couple days. Each person in your group selects an article. The person is responsible for providing context for the article regarding systems and systems thinking. Okay,
Hey,
so each
Trudy.
person does one of the articles. Yes.
I just want to clarify.
Sure.
On a previous proposed calendar for the program, it had May 9th listed as a class. So
Yes.
I have that on my calendar and also May 22nd.
No.
No.
We won't be using those. We just have May, let me get my calendar up here. May 22nd. It's a Saturday this time instead of a Sunday. And I think I had to do that because of there was a conflict.
We had a conflict and another course already had the 22nd.
Yeah.
Selected, I think. So we had to move to Saturday.
Yeah. And it could be Memorial or Mother's Day. I don't know. When is Mother's Day this year?
That was the 9th.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just the 22nd.
And I have a clarifying question. I think when we had originally started our outside Zoom meetings, we had been scheduling them for maybe an hour to an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the appropriate amount of time that you feel like we should be meeting in our small groups, or should those be closer to 2 hours?
Definitely closer to at least 90 minutes, and depending on the depth of your conversations, it could easily go to 2. But I was thinking at least 90 minutes.
And then, oh, sorry. When we have words like review an article, do you mean to go through it, or what can you clarify what you mean if review is used as a word in the planning?
To me, review is identifying the key content and then frame it within the context of the course themes. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. I just didn't want to unmute again for the screaming baby, but
sure, sure, no problem. All right, and then this is the April reflection prompt. It's more specific, and this is what Doug gave you earlier this morning. Okay. Okay, so for assignments, there will be further articles and videos in Google Classroom. Write the reflection, complete the plus delta, and then complete your project if you have not done so already, creating a model of the existing system in which you work. The purpose of the model is to create a visualization of the system and to share the ways in which various components or departments interact. Be ready to present your model to the cadre.
I got a question on that. Like,
sure.
How, I mean, I'm probably a little bit different than most people, but I work in a huge system. Like, can I just do like my local system?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please make the connection to the larger, but
Right.
yes, speak specifically about your individual system.
Imagine the clouds, remember the clouds at either end.
And then also, you are going to have some time to share what you've been thinking about with your philosophy of leading. So please be prepared to do that as well. Okay, so just to give you a heads up, again, these are the dates for 7/15, and there will be 2 texts that you will be reading as a group, and then there'll be supplemental text, and we're going to be doing that a little bit differently for the class on communication. So you'll be apprised of that in May. But don't think of an elephant by Lakoff. It's that's an interesting read. And then the Art and Science of Communications by Perkins.
Trudy, I
And-
saw on Amazon that there's the older version and the newer version of Don't Think of an Elephant. Does it matter which text?
I don't know that it matters.
Okay.
Yeah. You will have the syllabus sent to you in an email, so you won't have to wait until May. So as soon as that is updated with new supplemental text material and the groupings, we'll get that to you as soon as it's available.
So for those 3 days and 2 days, it'll be similar to what we're doing now, which will be a kind of like a most of the day Zoom meeting.
Yes.
Okay. So, and then I just want you guys to follow up with Doug, because in some of his videos, he talks about hosting barbecues.
Yeah.
That he'll go back to that at some point in time, because I would like to hold him to it.
Yes, we definitely will. And actually that is something that I've been thinking about on my walks that I take, is how that might happen, because that is a wonderful way to end the course going into the summer, and just another way for us to meet with each other in a different context. So that is something that I definitely want to think about and see if we can do that. So any other questions?
Can you just explain the administrator days?
Sure. Administrator Days is a conference that's put on by the Nebraska Council of School Administrators. It begins with a NDE day where all of the sessions are put on by staff members from the Nebraska Department of Education. And then there are 2 additional days where either vendors or what's most beneficial is listening to best practices that come out from other school districts. And so any of those days, if you can, I would ask you to attend on one of those 2 days, on one of the 3 days. If that's not going to work for you, if you have conferences that you are attending or staff development that you are involved in during the summer, then that's what I would, that's something that I would use as complementary or comparable to being involved in Administrator Days. You can go to the Nebraska Council of School Administrators site, and hopefully they have their conference program up and running. And so you can see what might be available that you might have an interest in. And I think it's just this, www.ncsa.org.
And I think, Trudy, I think NDE Day, the first day of Administrator Days, is being done in a hybrid format. So if you can't make it out to Kearney, you can zoom in to most of the NDE Day presentations.
Correct. Thanks, Brad. Okay. Any other questions? Anything further? Last thing?
Hey, Trudy.
Oh, sorry.
Elijah?
Go ahead, Shuli.
Oh, thank you. When do we register for this class?
When do you register for 715?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's open now. So you can register now if you'd like. I believe it's open until right up to the dates, like end of May or something.
Okay, thank you. So the classes, but will still be on Zoom. I want to get that clear.
Yes.
Okay, no
Yes.
in person. Okay.
Not in person, at least for June. We'll talk about July when we get closer to that.
Okay.
But for June, no.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I was gonna add some good news. I totally spaced off what week it was. Last Thursday was a milestone for me. I practiced the Wim Hof method, so I've done a year straight of 1 week, 10-minute ice baths. So I haven't missed a week in a whole year.
Wow.
Iron Man, you're an Iron Man, that's all.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So I know
All right.
it sounds crazy, but
Yeah.
The Iceman.
Yeah, that's probably a better moniker, yes.
And you know, Elijah, Brittany's gonna give birth next week, so your ice baths mean nothing.
oh no, I can't hold a candle to that. Don't want to.
Oh, shoot.
Brittany, my daughter is a midwife and she does do natural birth, so.
I'll keep that in mind.
All right, thank you all. Appreciate it. You've been fantastic again. So good. Take care, stay safe. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Oh, Lord, I can sleep very true.